Hi friends, welcome back. Unspook here, and today I'll bring you edu horror stories. But before we begin, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you like today's stories. So without further ado, dim the light, maybe grab your snack, and let's begin the stories.
Story 1. It happened on Valentine's Day, a few years ago. I was working the evening shift at a small flower shop not far from my place. Valentine's Day was always hectic, and by night, I was already drained. The shop was full of red stuff everywhere: roses, ribbons, cards, chocolate boxes. The smell of flowers was strong. Everything looked sweet and romantic, but I personally didn't feel that mood at all. Fewer people came in. Most couples had already gone home. The street outside slowly got quiet. I was alone, just cleaning the counter and fixing the last few bouquets. The lights were on, but some parts of the shop still felt a bit dark. I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone anymore. There was no sound, but the air felt different. When I looked up, I saw a man standing near the roses. He dressed neatly, holding a small red envelope. But something about him felt off. I made a bouquet without thinking too much about it. While I was working, my chest felt tight for no reason. I realized the bouquet was still on the counter. I was sure I had finished it. The wrapping was clean. The ribbon was tied properly. I told myself I was just tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept feeling like someone was watching me. The mirrors inside the shop made me uncomfortable, so I tried not to look at them. While I was getting ready to close, my phone buzzed with a news notification. It was about a man who died in a car accident a few years ago. The article mentioned how every Valentine's Day, flowers would appear in front of an old apartment where his girlfriend used to live before she passed away. When I saw the article, I didn't think much at first. Stuff like that shows up all the time, especially around Valentine's Day. Then I saw the photo. I'm shocked because he was the same man who had been in the shop earlier. I was hoping I was just tired. When I looked up at the counter, I couldn't find the bouquet I had just finished, and the spot where I left it was empty. Did I move it? Maybe I overthink. I walked around checking everywhere, but I couldn't find roses. Then I went to the toilet. The toilet was at the back of the shop, so I turned on the toilet light and locked the door. The small space suddenly felt tight. While I was inside, I kept listening. Was that a sound from outside? Did someone walk past the shop? Then the light went out. Everything went completely dark. I froze. Did the power just go out? But I could still see light from under the door. The shop lights were still on. My heart started racing. I reached for the wall, then the switch. I flipped it once, I flipped it again. Still nothing. Why isn't it turning on? Is this switch broken? It was working a minute ago. My mind kept asking the same question. The air felt colder, and the silence felt thick. I stood there, barely breathing, afraid to open the door. What if someone was standing outside? What if I wasn't alone? The light suddenly turned back on by itself. I unlocked the door and stepped out of the toilet. I slowly looked around the shop. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. Then I noticed rose petals on the floor, leading toward the front door. I was sure they weren't there before. I picked one up. I dropped it right away and wiped my hand on my pants. My chest felt tight, and my thoughts were racing. I walked to the front door and checked it. Still locked. So how did the bouquet leave? How did the petals get here? And I asked the same question over and over. The lights blinked on and off. Then I raised my voice. I shouted, asking if someone was there, but there was no answer. Was someone hiding? Did someone break in? I kept asking the same question. Then I heard a noise. It sounded like something being dragged slowly across the floor. I took a step back, my hands shaking. I shouted again, asking who was there. Then a box hit the floor, and I jumped. I looked toward the back, trying to see what just fell. The shadows back there looked darker than the rest of the shop. It felt off. Why did it look like that? Wasn't the light brighter before? The lights flickered again, and this time, one of them went out completely. The shop was half dark. Long shadows stretched across the floor, moving slightly as the lights buzzed. I shouted again, asking who was messing around, even though my voice sounded weak. My body felt ready to run, but my legs didn't move. Then I heard footsteps. They were coming from the back. Each step sounded clear against the floor. I stood there, frozen, staring at the space between the shelves, waiting for someone to appear. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The smell of roses suddenly got stronger. One of the shelves shook. Then a bouquet fell to the floor. I didn't need to get closer to know it was the same one. In the dim light, I glanced at the mirror behind the counter and froze. It looked like someone was standing right behind me. I turned around immediately, my heart racing. But there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, only my own reflection remained. Pale and shaking, like I didn't recognize myself anymore. I grabbed my bag and ran out of the shop without looking back. The next morning, I heard that fresh roses had appeared in front of an old, empty apartment nearby, wrapped like a Valentine's gift. Since that night, I've never worked a Valentine's Day shift again. Story 2. I used to work the night shift at a small printing warehouse on the edge of town. There were only 3 of us scheduled at night. One operator worked at the far end of the warehouse, and the security guard stayed near the entrance, and I was alone in the office area. Around 2 at night, I walked back from helping the operator with a minor machine issue. When I reached the hallway leading to the office and restrooms, all the lights were on. That was strange. We usually kept them dim to save power during night shifts. I assumed the security guard had turned them on during his rounds and didn't think much of it. Not long after, I needed to use the restroom. As I walked down the hallway, I heard footsteps ahead of me. Someone else was there. Then the footsteps stopped suddenly, right before I reached the restroom. Inside, the lights were already on. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I returned to the office quicker than usual. The system log showed activity from a machine in Section C. That section had been closed for weeks due to maintenance, and the power was supposed to be disconnected. The operator confirmed he wasn't anywhere near that area. I went to the security room to check the cameras. The hallway camera was on, showing all the lights still lit. At the far end, near the restroom, someone was standing there. The figure wasn't moving. The camera zoom made things worse. There was no face, the head slowly turned toward the camera, the screen filled with static. Every monitor shut off at once. At the same time, the warehouse lights flickered. Footsteps started running down the hallway, fast and uneven, stopping right outside the security room. Then there was knocking. At that moment, the operator's voice came through the radio, asking why no one was responding. The voice outside sounded identical, but the timing was wrong. When the lights returned, the hallway was empty. The door had no scratches, and the cameras showed nothing unusual. Later, the operator admitted he had seen someone standing beside his machine earlier that night, watching him work. When he looked again, it was gone. We spent the rest of the shift locked inside the security room. No one left until morning. I asked a supervisor about Section C. After some hesitation, he mentioned a worker who had died there years ago during night shift. The man was found standing upright, facing the machine as if he had never fallen. The next night shift, the motion sensor near Section C went off again. The alert showed repeated movement, not just a single trigger as if someone was pacing back and forth. The cameras showed nothing. The hallway and the closed section were completely empty. Pages were being counted, even though no paper was loaded, and the machine was supposed to be offline. The numbers kept climbing, then suddenly dropped back to 0. The security room door handle moved once. The air inside the room became thick and stale. The security guard's radio turned on by itself, filling the room with static. Through the noise, there was a faint rhythmic sound, almost like someone tapping metal in a steady pattern. Not long after that, footsteps returned, moving from the far end of the warehouse toward the security room. Each step sounded uneven, like one foot was dragging slightly across the floor. One of the monitors flickered back on by itself. The camera feed showed Section C. The machine there was running, its rollers turning slowly with no paper inside. Watching the monitors made my stomach tighten in a way I had never felt before. Every instinct told me not to look, but I couldn't pull my eyes away. The image felt heavy, like it was pressing back at me through the monitor. I became aware of every small sound around me. The hum of the monitors, the faint buzz of the lights, my own breathing sounding too loud in my ears. My heart was beating fast, but my body felt frozen. When the footsteps outside stopped, I kept my eyes on the door. My legs started to ache from how tense they were. I remember thinking how unreal it all felt, like my brain was trying to distance itself from what was happening. Then the monitors turned off one by one. When morning came, the warehouse looked normal. The hallway lights were off. Section C was locked, and the machine was cold and had no power. Later on, we checked the cameras. A few hours of footage were missing. The files were just not there. We finished the shift quietly. No one really talked. I went home feeling tired, but not the normal kind of tired. I didn't work there much longer. Even now, when I'm up late and a place gets really quiet, I still pay attention to small sounds. Story 3. This happened 1 year ago on a Halloween night I thought would be completely ordinary. Back then, I was living alone in a small rented house near the edge of town. I had been there for almost a year and never experienced anything strange. I never cared much about Halloween. For me, it was just another night with kids in costumes and cheap candy from the store. Still, I didn't want to be the boring house on the street, so that evening I bought a bag of candy and turned on my porch light. As the sun went down, kids started coming by. Some were excited, some shy, some barely wearing costumes at all. I opened the door, handed out candy, and exchanged quick smiles. Around 8 at night, the street slowly quieted down. Porch lights turn off one by one. I checked the time and thought I'd wait a bit longer before closing up for the night. Then the doorbell rang. I grabbed the candy bowl and opened the door, but no one was there. I stepped forward and looked down the porch steps. The street was empty. I told myself it was just a prank. Halloween brings out that kind of thing. I closed the door and locked it. Then the doorbell rang again. This time, I waited a moment before standing up. Something about it felt off. I opened the door slowly. Again, no one was there. But this time, I noticed something sitting on the porch. A small pumpkin placed right near my door. I was sure it hadn't been there earlier. I would have noticed it. I stood there and stared at it. Finally, I nudged it aside with my foot and went back inside, trying to laugh at myself. Still, I double-checked the locks and closed the curtains. Around 9, the house felt unusually quiet. Then I heard 3 slow knocks. My heart started racing. No one ever knocked like that, especially not on Halloween. I walked toward the door slowly and looked through the peephole. Someone was standing there. They were tall, wearing a long, dark coat. Their face was covered by a plain white mask with two dark holes where the eyes should be. I told myself it was just a costume, someone trying to scare me. I didn't open the door. Then another knock came. The person stayed completely still after knocking, as if they were waiting for something. When they finally spoke, their voices didn't sound playful at all. There was no excitement, no joking tone, nothing that matched the night or the occasion. I answered from behind the door, telling them I didn't have any candy left. Even as I said it, my voice didn't sound like my own. It came out quieter than I expected, like my body already knew this wasn't a normal interaction. There was no response. The silence stretched longer than it should have. I stood there, listening for any movement on the porch. Then the voice came back, saying it was fine. When I stepped away from the door, my hands were shaking, and I suddenly became aware of how close I had been standing to it. I didn't say anything else. I just stood there until I finally heard footsteps fading into the quiet street. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed on the couch with the lights on, listening to every small sound the house made, replaying the moment in my head over and over. No matter how many times I tried to explain it logically, the feeling wouldn't go away. The next morning, I opened the door carefully, already tense before I even stepped outside. The pumpkin was there again. This time, it was carved. The face wasn't symmetrical. The cuts were uneven, like whoever made it didn't care about how it looked, only that it was finished. The mouth was stretched wide open. Inside was a folded piece of paper. The message thanked me for opening the door. I stood there staring at it, feeling sick. I knew, without a doubt, that I had never opened that door. The next day, I moved out. When people asked why, I told them I'd gotten a new job and needed a change of place. That part wasn't entirely a lie, it was just easier to say. I never told anyone what really happened that night. Not my friends, not my coworkers, not even my family. Every time I thought about explaining it, I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound paranoid, and honestly, I didn't want to hear someone laugh and say it was probably just a prank. So I kept it to myself and moved on with my life, at least I tried to. Story 4. A few months ago, something strange happened to me on Valentine's Day. That night, I went to a small Valentine's party at my aunt's house. It wasn't anything special, just a simple gathering with a few people. People slowly started leaving, and the music played softer without anyone changing it. I stayed behind to help clean up, picking up empty cups and moving things back into place. While I was cleaning, I noticed a heart-shaped balloon in the corner of the room. It moved slightly, even though the windows were closed and no one was near it. I watched it for a second, then ignored it. Balloons move sometimes. I didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, the music changed. The song became slower. I didn't remember anyone touching the speaker, but I assumed it was just on shuffle. Still, the room felt quieter after that. When I looked around, I noticed some Valentine cards on the floor near the couch. Earlier, they had been neatly placed on the table. I picked the cards up one by one. While I was doing that, the balloon fell to the floor, rolled slowly across the room, and stopped near the hallway. The music started repeating the same part of the song again and again. I finally asked if someone was controlling the speaker, but no one answered. A few people looked in my direction, then went back to what they were doing. The music kept looping, the same line playing over and over. I stood up and walked closer to the speaker, thinking maybe my phone had connected by accident. When I checked, nothing was connected. The screen showed the song still playing normally, even though it wasn't. The conversation around me slowly faded, like people were talking less without realizing it. The chairs stopped moving. I looked back at the hallway where the balloon had stopped. It hadn't moved again, like it was placed there on purpose. The light in the hallway flickered softly. No one else seemed to notice. Then I felt something brush past my shoulder, like someone walking too close behind me. I stepped aside automatically and turned, ready to apologize, but there was no one there. I laughed awkwardly, tried to ignore it, but I suddenly felt very aware of where everyone was standing, counting people without meaning to. Everyone was in front of me. No one was behind me. Then I saw a woman running toward a room at the far end of the house. She didn't look panicked. Not exactly. But something about her movement made me curious. Maybe she needed something, I thought. I didn't think it was strange at the time. I just followed her and wanted to ask if she was okay or if she needed help. Then I noticed the faint scent of something sweet, like candy or flowers, lingering in the corner of the hall. Then she stopped suddenly in front of a closed door. I reached her and gently asked if she was all right. There was no answer. Her head was slightly tilted, as if listening for something. The room beyond the door was darker than the rest of the house. I stepped closer. The room was empty. When I turned back, the hallway was still empty. The woman I'd followed was gone. Maybe she had slipped past me. I started to feel uneasy, realizing I hadn't actually seen her face clearly. I called her, but she didn't answer. Then the lights flickered again, and the room behind the closed door darker than before. So I stepped back, and I walked back toward the living room. I told myself it was nothing. It was just my head messing with me. I could hear people talking and laughing from the other room. I suddenly felt something behind me. I stopped and turned around. There was nothing there. Then something rushed past my arm, jumped in surprise. Before I could react, a strong force hit my shoulder and pushed me forward. I almost fell and had to grab the wall. My shoulder hurt, like I had been shoved hard. I looked around fast, but the hallway was empty. I checked my arm, expecting to see a mark or a bruise, but there was nothing at all. Even my clothes looked normal. It didn't make sense. Lights started flickering again, faster this time. Then I heard the music come back, repeating the same part, even though the speaker was already off. I panicked and quickly walked away. When I got back to the others, they asked why I looked so pale. I said I just tired. I didn't explain what happened. There was nothing I could show them. After that day, I didn't experience anything strange anymore. But until now, sometimes when I'm alone, that memory still comes back. Story 5. I once worked the night shift at a small office building. It wasn't a big place, just 3 floors. My job was simple. Check the rooms, make sure the lights were off, and stay at the front desk until morning. Most nights were boring. I usually spent the time scrolling on my phone and drinking coffee to stay awake. That night, I did my usual round. First floor, second floor, then the third. Everything looked fine. When I got back to the desk, I noticed one of the hallway lights on the second floor was on. I was sure I turned it off earlier. I thought maybe I missed it, so I went back up. The hallway was empty. I turned the light off and went back downstairs. About 20 minutes later, the same light was on again. I started paying attention. I went up a second time. Same thing, nothing out of place. On my way back down, I heard a sound coming from above me. I stopped for a moment and listened. The steps stopped too. Then the phone at the desk rang. It was an internal call from the 3rd floor. I answered it, but no one spoke. I could hear light static. Then the call ended. I checked the call log. No rooms were supposed to be active at night. Then the phone rang again. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at it, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. When I finally picked it up, the static was louder this time. There was a faint sound, like someone breathing close to the receiver. The lights on the 2nd floor turned on. I stayed at the desk, watching the monitor. The camera showed the hallway clearly. No one was there. The lights stayed on for about a minute, then turned off all at once. The phone rang again, this time. The call log showed something different. The source wasn't a room number, it just said internal. My hands were already sweating, and I realized I hadn't moved from the chair at all. Then the elevator made a sound. The screen above it lit up. It showed the number 3. The doors stayed closed, but the indicator slowly changed to 2. I didn't hear the elevator moving. There was no usual sound, just the number changing. And when it reached 1, the screen went blank. The phone stopped ringing. The lights stayed off. The monitors showed empty hallways. I sat there until morning, not checking anything else. The next night, I came to work feeling uneasy, but I tried to stay calm. I sat at the desk, drank my coffee, and watched the monitors like usual. For a while, nothing strange happened. I started to think maybe I was just tired the night before. Then, one of the screens caught my attention. On the 3rd floor, a man was standing in the hallway. He was facing the wall and not moving at all. He stood in the same position for a long time. His head slowly turned. When I saw his face, my body felt weak. His eyes were open, but he didn't blink. He began to walk toward the camera. His steps were slow. The light above him flickered as he passed under it, and his shadow stretched across the floor. When he reached the camera, he stopped. His face filled the screen. I could see his pale skin and tired eyes clearly. Then the screen went black, my heart started beating fast, and my hands felt weak. I heard footsteps behind the desk. They were slow and stopped very close to me. I knew someone was there. The man was standing in front of me. He looked exactly like he did on the screen. His clothes were old and dirty. His face was blank, and he didn't move or speak. The desk light flickered once. When the light came back, he was gone. I couldn't move. My legs felt weak, and my chest felt tight. Then I heard a sound behind me, and they followed me. I stood up from the chair without thinking and stepped back. The footsteps got faster. I could hear them clearly, moving across the floor, getting closer. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. Behind me, the footsteps were heavy and fast. As I reached the hallway, the lights started turning off one by one. Right in front of me. I could feel him behind me. I didn't look back. I was too scared to. The door at the end of the hall was locked. I pulled it hard, again and again. The footsteps stopped right behind me. I unlocked the door, ran outside, and didn't look back. And that was the last night I ever worked there. I didn't tell my co-workers what really happened. I didn't think they would believe me, and I didn't want to sound strange. I only told them that I wanted to look for a better job. They didn't ask much after that. To them, it probably sounded normal. Story 6. This happened to me one Halloween when I was volunteering at a small community hospital. That night, most of the staff wore small decorations, orange headbands, and pumpkin pins. But I didn't. I was tired, and all I wanted was to finish my shift and go home. Around 10 at night, I was asked to check on a patient in one of the older wings, the part of the hospital that wasn't used often anymore. I remember stepping down the long corridor and feeling a chill crawl up my neck, even though the heater was on. One room had its door slightly ajar. The light inside was on. According to the board, the room should have been empty. I paused for a moment, trying to convince myself it was probably a cleaning staff who had left it open. When I peeked inside, there was a small child sitting in the middle of the room. I froze. The child was wearing a white sheet, roughly cut, with holes for the eyes. I stepped inside slowly and asked the child where their parents were. The child didn't respond. I repeated myself, trying to keep my voice calm. The child's head turned toward me, but I couldn't see their face through the sheet. The way the child moved felt wrong. Then I realized something else. The room was completely silent. I backed out, trying to keep my hands from shaking, and hurried to the nurse's station. I asked if anyone had brought a child. The staff looked confused. Visiting hours were over, and no children were allowed there that late. One of the older nurses went pale when I told her which room it was. She whispered that years ago, a child had died in that very room on Halloween night. Some staff believed that the child's spirit sometimes appeared in the hallways on that date. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I must have imagined it. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. Every time I walked down that wing, I felt like someone was just behind me. It wasn't loud footsteps or anything obvious. At first, it was little things. A clipboard I'd left on the counter was suddenly on the floor. Pens rolled across the tiles like they'd been nudged. Lights flickered in rooms that weren't even being used. I kept telling myself it was just an old building, that the electrical wiring was acting up, or that I was too tired to notice normally. Then came the noises. Soft tapping on windows, barely audible. Not random like wind or pipes. The taps seemed to follow me from room to room, starting and stopping with me. I would stop and listen, but no one was ever there. Sometimes I thought I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. Just the empty hallway. By the time my shift ended, I was completely drained. My hands were shaky, my back sore from tensing all night, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that child again. I didn't tell anyone about it, at least not at first. I kept it to myself and tried to move on, convincing myself it was just exhaustion and nerves. Except for one of the older nurses, she told me she had experienced the same things long before I ever became a volunteer at that hospital. The footsteps in empty hallways, objects moving when no one was around, the feeling of being followed, especially in that older wing. She said it usually happens around Halloween. I asked her why no one ever talked about it. She said people didn't want to sound crazy. And honestly, I understood that. After that conversation, things made a bit more sense. It also confirmed that what I felt that night wasn't just in my head. I finished my volunteer period a few weeks later. Nothing as intense happened again, but the feeling never fully went away. Even now, when Halloween comes around, I think about that hospital. Story 7. This happened a couple of Halloweens ago. I was working part-time at this little bookstore in the city. That night, I decided to stay late, closing by myself. Usually it's kind of nice. I get to straighten up, put away new books, and not have to deal with anyone in the way. The streets outside were almost empty for a Saturday night, and the flickering neon from the coffee shop made everything look kind of off. I was stacking some books near the front window when I heard it. A faint scraping noise coming from the alley next to the store. I froze for a second. Sounded like maybe someone dragging something or a chair scraping along the concrete. I told myself it was just the wind or a stray animal. Then it happened again. My curiosity got the better of me, so I peeked through the blinds, but there was nothing there. I went back to my work, but then more little things started happening. A book I'd just put down would be on the floor a minute later. Lights flickered above me, and sometimes I thought I felt something brushing past the shelves. At one point, I went to grab a box in the back, and the scraping followed me. Every time I turned a corner, it stopped. When I stopped, it started again. Just as I was thinking maybe I should just call it a night, I noticed something in the window facing the alley. A little figure just standing there staring at the store. I couldn't see its face, just a dark shape, small, hunched over, like a kid, and it didn't move. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. The lights inside the store reflected off the glass, so I told myself that was probably all it was, but I didn't move right away. Then I forced myself to turn away from the window. The moment I did, the scraping sound came back. I grabbed my phone, pretending to check the time, mostly just so my hands would stop shaking. I told myself to finish up and leave. As I walked toward the front, I heard footsteps that didn't match mine, but I didn't want to turn around. The door alarm suddenly chimed, making me jump. I looked up at the entrance. The door was still locked. Then I grabbed my bag, turned off the lights, and locked the door. I started walking away, trying not to think about it. I hadn't gone far when I heard a loud crash from inside the store. It sounded like something breaking or falling hard. I really didn't want to go back, but I couldn't just leave it like that. So I turned around and unlocked the door again. Inside, the store was dark and quiet. I turned the lights back on and saw one of the shelves near the back had fallen over. Books were scattered all over the floor. That shelf had been fine when I left. There was no way it could have just fallen on its own. I stepped closer, thinking I should at least clean the mess. But then I saw a pumpkin was sitting on the bookshelf. It had a carved face, twisted and ugly, like it was grinning at me. I was sure it hadn't been there before. The moment I saw it, my body froze. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't even breathe properly. I don't know how long I stood there. Then the lights flickered. When I looked back at the shelf, the pumpkin was gone. The books were still scattered. The shelf was still tipped over. But the pumpkin wasn't there anymore, like it had never existed in the first place. Then I ran. I didn't even think twice. I didn't care how messed up the store was anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. I don't even remember locking the door properly. That whole night, I couldn't sleep at all. The next morning, I went back to the store, and everything looked normal. The shelves were back in place. The books were neat, like nothing had happened at all. Then I noticed something on the wall near the back. Random scratches, messy lines, like someone had dragged something sharp across it. I reached out without thinking and touched one of the marks. The paint was chipped, rough under my fingers. This wasn't something that could have happened by accident. This wasn't old damage either. I pulled my hand back and felt this cold weight settle in my stomach. I knew those scratches hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I spent most of my time in that store. I cleaned it. I organized it. I would have noticed something like that immediately. I tried not to think about it too much. I told myself to focus on work, on anything else. So I grabbed a book from one of the shelves and started flipping through it, pretending to read just to keep my mind busy. Then I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was walking into the store, just a shape passing the doorway. Instinct kicked in, and I looked up right away, expecting to see a customer standing there, maybe already looking around. But the entrance was empty. The door hadn't made a sound. I stayed still for a few seconds. The store was completely quiet. I told myself maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, maybe a car passing outside, maybe nothing at all. I went back to the book, but I couldn't focus anymore. I kept staring at the pages, turning them without really reading. My eyes kept moving on their own, drifting toward the door, then toward the back of the store like I was expecting someone to walk in or something to shift between the shelves. As the sky outside started to darken, my body just felt tense. It was the second night after Halloween, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something might happen again. I tried to act normal, kept walking around, straightening books that were already straight, wiping the counter even though it wasn't dirty. Every little sound caught my attention. The low hum of the lights, a faint creak from one of the shelves, and a car passing outside. I kept glancing over my shoulder, especially when I had my back turned to the store. I stayed near the front as much as I could. Being close to the door made me feel a little better, like I had an easy way out if I needed it. I avoided the back area completely. I didn't want to stand near that wall again. I didn't even want to look at it. I checked my phone more times than I can count. Minutes dragged on and the store stayed quiet the whole time. No customers came in. That quiet felt tense, like the store was just empty enough for me to notice every sound. Then something shifted near the kids section. I looked up slowly, already expecting to see nothing. But someone was standing there. At first, my mind tried to make it normal. Maybe they came in quietly. Maybe the door didn't make a sound. That happens sometimes. Then I really looked at them. They were wearing Halloween costumes. A long black robe that looked old and a little dirty. Halloween was already over, that thought kept repeating in my head. They weren't looking around, just standing there, facing the shelf like they were pretending to browse but not touching anything. I asked if they needed help. My voice sounded thin, even to me. They slowly turned their head toward me. The eye holes were dark. I couldn't see anything behind them. I took a small step back without thinking. I told myself it had to be a prank, but nothing about it felt playful. They took one slow step forward. I could hear the fabric of the robe drag lightly across the floor. That sound stuck in my head. I moved toward the counter, reaching for my bag. My hands were shaking so bad I had trouble grabbing it. I kept my eyes on them, afraid they'd move faster if I looked away. They didn't rush. They just stood there again. The mask didn't move. It felt like they were watching me, even though I couldn't see their eyes. I kept backing up slowly, step by step, until my back almost hit the counter. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to lose sight of them. My grip tightened around my bag like it was the only real thing keeping me grounded. The silence was awful. No sound from the door. I swallowed and took another step back, then the lights flickered. When I looked back at the aisle, it was empty again, no sound of anyone leaving. The space between the shelves looked exactly the same as always, like no one had ever been standing there at all. But my body didn't relax. If anything, it got worse. I stayed there for a few seconds, staring at that spot, waiting for something to move. I didn't wait anymore. I turned, grabbed my keys, and went straight for the door, not caring how loud I was or how obvious it looked. I just wanted to be outside. The second I stepped out, I felt like someone was right behind me. I started walking fast, then faster, my footsteps echoing a little too loudly in the empty street. I could hear my own breathing getting messy. I didn't know why, but I was sure if I stopped, something would catch up to me. I turned forward again, telling myself to calm down, but my legs started feeling weak, like all the energy was draining out of them at once. I tried to run, but my body wasn't keeping up with what my mind was screaming at it to do. Each step felt slower than the last. I could still feel it behind me, close enough that my shoulders tensed up, like I was about to be grabbed, my legs shaking so bad I almost tripped. I kept moving, forcing myself forward, even though every part of me felt tired all of a sudden. I kept running. My legs didn't fully belong to me anymore, and my vision started to blur around the edges. I knew I should stop, but I was too scared to. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like a person, but at the same time, not really. My body slammed forward, and I lost my balance. I remember thinking for a split second that it couldn't be a kid. There was no way. By then, I could barely see anything clearly anyway. Everything went dark. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the ground. Someone was standing over me, asking if I was okay. Apparently, they'd been passing by and found me lying there. I was confused, sore, and shaking, but there was no one else around. Then I reported what happened to the police. They checked the area. They didn't find anything. They even checked nearby CCTV cameras. According to them, nothing showed up. Just me running down the street, stopping, turning around, and acting strange before collapsing. They told me it looked like I had a breakdown and suggested I get professional help. I listened to them and I nodded. What else was I supposed to do? But I know what I felt. I know something was there. I wasn't imagining the fear. I was fully aware of what was happening. I'm sure of that. Whatever happened to me that night was real. After that night, nothing else happened. Everything went back to normal, like it never happened. I used to think stalker stories were something that only happened in movies and news articles, not something that could actually happen to me. It started so small that if I told anyone about it back then, they probably would have laughed and told me I was crazy. Every morning I left for work around the same time en route. That's why I didn't stand out at first when I noticed someone behind me. But I told myself it was nothing, because people walk and live here, but then it kept happening. If it was every day, maybe I would have reacted faster, but it was random. 2 days in a row, then nothing for a week. Then, late at night, when the street was empty, I never saw his face at first, because he always dressed dark, using a hoodie. I started noticing him outside the convenience store when I went in late, sitting on a bench across the street from my house and pretending to stare at his own phone. Once I saw him in the reflection of a shop window behind me. When I turned around, he was already gone. I got anonymous messages, but a single dot, an empty chat notification that disappeared when I opened it. I blocked the number, but another one showed up the next day. I stopped taking my usual route. I changed my schedule. I told myself I was being careful, not scared, but my body knew the truth. One night I heard something outside my house, but I didn't look. I just stayed in my bed, staring at the ceiling. I told myself it was just my imagination. Then my phone buzzed. The message said, "Are you awake?" Then I looked out the window. He was standing under the streetlight, right across from my house. This time I could see his face. He was smiling. I stepped back so fast and almost fell. The next morning, I went to the police. They asked if he had touched me, threatened me, broken in. When I said no, their faces changed. They checked the CCTV around my street. In the footage, you could see me walking, you could see me stopping, but behind me, there was no one. I was the only one caught on CCTV at that time. The police said I was hallucinating and told me to seek professional help. I started to believe that maybe the police were right, that I was experiencing stress and hallucinations. But for what reason? I had been living my life well all this time. That question stayed with me. I kept asking myself the same thing over and over. I went through my days in my head, trying to find what I might have missed. My life wasn't falling apart. I woke up, went to work, and did what I needed to do. I ate regularly, I slept. Nothing felt out of control. So why did my chest still feel tight for no reason? If this was really just stress, it didn't make sense to me. I wasn't running from anything. I wasn't overwhelmed, at least that's what I thought. I tried to accept the explanation anyway. Maybe stress doesn't always announce itself. I thought that if I believed it, things would stop. I told myself it was all in my head. And once I accepted that, life would go back to normal. But it got worse. I started feeling like I was being followed more often. At first, it was only at night. Then it happened during the day, too. On my way to work, when I went to the store, even when other people were around. It felt like someone was always behind me. I could feel it when I stopped walking and when I walked faster. But I kept telling myself this was stress. I was imagining danger. But the feeling didn't come and go randomly. Sometimes I wanted to turn around and look, just to prove to myself that no one was there. But I was scared that if I looked and actually saw someone, I wouldn't be able to lie to myself anymore. So I kept walking. Then, when I went out to buy some food at night, I was followed from a distance. I refused to realize it at first. I told myself it wasn't real. But his footsteps became clearer, and I could feel him getting closer. My chest tightened. I started running faster. When I turned my head, he was suddenly right in front of me. I panicked and fell to the ground as he was about to attack me. But when I realized I was lying on the ground, he was gone, and he was standing at the corner of the street. I lay there for a moment, frozen. My body hurt from the fall, but the fear hurt more. I didn't understand how he could be in front of me. Then suddenly, far away, it felt wrong. He just stood there watching me. That made it worse. If he had chased me, maybe I could have explained, but he just stayed still. I forced myself to stand up. My legs were weak, and my hands were shaking so badly I almost fell again. I didn't look at him for long. I was scared that if I did, I would see his face clearly, and I wasn't sure I could handle that. I ran home without looking back. My heart was still beating too fast. I tried to breathe, to calm myself, but my mind kept replaying the situation over and over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what the police said about stress and hallucinations. I really wanted to believe that. But why did it feel so real? Even now, I still feel like I'm being followed, like there's a stalker somewhere. It's not as bad as it used to be. I've gotten spiritual help, and I also met with a professional for support. At least now, I'm not as scared as I was before. Sometimes the feeling comes back quietly, but I know how to handle it better now. I remind myself to breathe, to stay grounded, to trust that I'm safer than I was back then. I don't know if what I experienced was something real or something my mind created during a difficult time. Maybe it was both. What matters to me now is that I'm still here, still moving forward. Story 2. This happened when I was still in college. At that time, I was in my early 20s living in a dorm near campus. Dorm life felt ordinary, a little tiring and boring, but manageable. I went to classes, came back to my room, studied late, sometimes, and slept when I could. Nothing felt out of place. It was just another phase of life. The dorm itself was quiet most of the time. During the day, it was full of noise, doors opening, people laughing, footsteps rushing down the hallway. But at night, the hallways became long and empty. Sometimes when I walked back to my room, I felt like someone was behind me. Not obvious. I told myself it was normal. Anyone would feel that way in a quiet dorm at night. There were also small moments that didn't make sense when I came back and noticed my door wasn't fully closed. I was sure I had shut it before leaving, but I didn't think too much about it. Maybe my roommate opened it, or maybe I forgot. Another time, I felt like someone was standing at the end of the hallway when I stepped out of my room. I looked up, but no one was there. The hallway was empty. I laughed at myself after that. I told myself I was just tired. College can do that to you. Long days, little sleep, and too many thoughts. On campus, life went on as usual. But sometimes, even in a crowded place, I felt like someone was watching me. I couldn't tell from where. I just felt it. I haven't changed my routine yet. I still walked the same paths. I still came back to the dorm at the same time. I didn't want to admit something was wrong when I wasn't even sure myself. At night, I started locking my door more carefully. Not because I was scared, I just got used to being careful, especially when there was that uneasy feeling. When I feel uneasy, I pay attention to small things without realizing it. That night, as I was locking the door, the handle suddenly moved. I froze for a second. My first thought was my roommate. Maybe she forgot her key. That made sense, so I unlocked the door and opened it, but no one was there. The hallway was empty. I was about to close the door again when I looked down and noticed footprints. They weren't mine, the size was different. They weren't my roommate's either, because the shape didn't match her shoes. I stood there staring at them longer than I should have. My chest felt tight, but I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Dorm hallways are shared. Anyone could have walked there, but I couldn't explain why the footprints stopped right in front of my door. I went back inside and closed the door slowly. My roommate was lying on her bed, wearing earphones, scrolling on her phone. She looked relaxed. I asked her if she had just gone outside, and she shook her head and took one earphone off. She said she'd been there the whole time. I didn't say anything after that. I didn't show her the footprints. I didn't want to sound dramatic. I didn't want to scare her and myself. That night, I lay in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. Every small sound made me pause. A step in the hallway, a door opening somewhere far away. I listened carefully, even though I told myself there was nothing to listen for. The next few days, life went on like normal, but I started checking my door twice before sleeping. Sometimes 3 times. I looked at the floor outside my room more often than I wanted to admit. I wasn't panicking. I was just aware. I was in denial at that time. It felt like someone had crossed a line, and even though nothing bad had happened yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was getting closer. One afternoon, I went to the lake near campus to clear my mind. It was one of the few places where I could feel calm. I did some light exercise. When I changed direction, I felt something shift behind me. I turned around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one. The place was open. People came and went. I continued walking, trying to ignore the feeling, but it kept coming back. Every few minutes, I felt like I was being followed. Every time I looked back, there was no one there. It happened again and again. Then I stopped and sat down to rest. The path around was mostly empty. I looked around carefully, scanning the place, trying to spot anyone I might have missed. Still, I found no one. I even walked around the area a bit, checking corners and paths that led away from the lake. It felt strange to do that, but I needed to be sure. I stood there for a moment, feeling confused more than scared. If no one was there, why did it feel so real? After that day at the lake, I tried to convince myself that I was just tired. College life can mess with your head, especially when you spend too much time thinking. I told myself that the quiet places made my thoughts louder, and that was all. Nothing more. Still, I started noticing how often I felt that same presence. Back at the dorm, my days looked normal on the surface. I went to class, sat through lectures, worked on assignments, and talked with friends. I laughed when I needed to. I answered questions. No one noticed anything strange about me, and I liked it that way. As long as things looked normal, I could pretend they were. But at night, I paid more attention to sounds in the hallway. I kept telling myself I wasn't scared. I was just careful. Being careful felt reasonable. It felt like something anyone would do. I didn't want to label what I was feeling as fear, because fear would mean admitting something was wrong. Some nights I lay in bed and listened to my roommate breathing softly beside me. That sound grounded me. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, that there was someone real in the room with me. When I focused on that, The uneasy feeling faded a little. During the day, I avoided quiet places without fully realizing it. I chose paths with more people. I stayed longer in common areas because it felt easier to breathe there. I didn't connect the dots back then. I didn't think of it as being followed. I thought of it as stress or imagination, or just a phase, something that would pass once I got used to dorm life. Looking back, now I realize how much effort I put into denying it, how carefully I explained everything away. At that time, it felt safer to believe that nothing was happening than to face the idea that something was. But by then, I couldn't keep denying it anymore. The feeling started to become heavier, harder to ignore. I went back to the lake one evening, hoping the calm would help again. The sky was already turning dark, and the area was quieter than usual. I told myself it was fine. I'd been there before. I started walking again, this time closer to the water. Without realizing it, I slowed down. The path felt tighter, like there was less space to move. I told myself I should leave. But before I could, the feeling suddenly grew stronger. It felt like someone ran toward me, fast and out of nowhere. I stepped back without thinking, my foot slipping on the uneven ground near the edge. I lost my balance. I threw my weight forward and caught myself just in time, my hands scraping against the dirt. If I had taken one more step back, I would have fallen into the lake. I stayed there for a moment. I turned around, expecting to finally see someone. But the path was empty. No sound of footsteps running away, and no movement at all. Suddenly, I saw a man approaching me. Moving fast toward me, the way he came felt threatening. My body reacted on its own, panic taking over. I stepped back again. That was when my body fell into the lake. I couldn't swim. The cold water shocked me, and I struggled to keep myself from sinking. I tried to stay afloat, using all my strength just to keep my head above the water. My chest burned as I gasped for air. From the water, I looked up. I could see the man standing above me. Then, suddenly, he disappeared, just like that. Luckily, an old man on a bicycle passed by and noticed me. He rushed over, helped pull me out of the water, and asked if I was okay. My body was shaking badly. I couldn't answer properly. I was soaked, cold, and overwhelmed. After that, my thoughts were messy, and my body felt weak. The old man kept talking to me, trying to calm me down, but I could barely focus on his words. I kept looking back at the lake, half expecting to see someone standing there again. But there was nothing. Then I reported the incident to the police. Just like I expected, they didn't find anything. In the end, I was the one who seemed strange to them. After that, I took a break from college, but because I was really shaken. I started seeing a psychologist to help me deal with everything. Slowly, I got better. I learned how to live normally again. That's why I can finally tell this story now. Story 3. This happened a few years ago, back when I was staying in a small countryside area. Houses were far apart, separated by fields, trees, and long dirt paths. Nothing ever really happened there, or at least that's what people like to believe. At that time, I was staying with a relative. The house stood alone, a bit away from the main road. During the day, you could hear birds, insects, and the wind moving through the trees. At night, I usually went to bed early. There wasn't much to do once the sun went down. No streetlights nearby. No late-night shops. Sometimes I would sit by the window before sleeping, looking out at the fields. The first strange thing was small. I started noticing footprints near the side of the house in the morning. At first, I thought it was just neighbors passing by, or maybe animals. It was the countryside, after all. Things like that weren't unusual, but the footprints kept appearing, always near the same spot, close to my window. I start noticing things I'd normally ignore. I felt uncomfortable, like someone was there, somewhere beyond the dark. I would close the curtains tighter, lock the door, and tell myself it was just my imagination. One night, I heard footsteps outside. I started seeing a shadow behind my bedroom curtain. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the tree outside moving, but when I checked again, I saw a tall man standing behind a tree, staring straight at my house. What confused me was the distance. Just moments ago, the shadow looked like it was right in front of my window. But now, he was standing much farther away. If he had been that close before, how did he end up there so fast? I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear him move at all. I stood there for a while, watching him through the small gap in the curtain. He didn't wave and didn't try to hide. The countryside was quiet that night. After a moment, I stepped back and closed the curtain fully. I locked the door again, even though it was already locked. I told myself it was probably someone passing by, maybe a traveler or someone who lost their way. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual, lying in bed and wondering if he was still out there. During the day, I went to the cattle farm like usual. The routine helped. Feeding the cows, checking the fences, doing simple work. It usually cleared my mind. The countryside looked calm in the daylight, nothing that looked dangerous. Then I saw him. He was standing behind a tree at the edge of the field. He wasn't close, but he wasn't far either, close enough for me to know he was watching me. I froze for a moment, my hand still holding the feed. I tried to tell myself it was just a farm worker from another area, or maybe someone passing through. But when he stepped out slightly from behind the tree, I felt heavy feeling in my chest. He started walking toward me. I turned back to the animals, forcing myself to keep moving. I didn't want to show fear. I kept pouring feed, pretending everything was normal. When I looked up again, he was gone. At night, I heard footsteps circling the house. Sometimes they stopped right outside my window. Other times, I heard someone breathing close to the wall. When I checked, there was never anyone there. Sometimes, I swore I saw someone standing at the edge of my vision, but when I turned my head, there was nothing. One night, I heard knocking. I stayed still in my bed and barely breathing. Then I heard footsteps walking away right outside my door. In the morning, there were deep footprints in the dirt near the house. I reported it to the local police. They checked the area, walked around the fields, and asked neighbors. No one had seen anything. There was no unusual activity. They told me not to worry. They thought I was stressed. One evening, I saw him again. This time, he was closer than ever, standing near the fence, staring straight at me. Before I could even react, he suddenly rushed toward me. I stumbled backward, barely keeping my balance, my heart pounding so hard it actually hurt. Fear took over everything in that moment. After that night, I couldn't stay alone anymore. I moved out for a while and stayed with someone else. I kept trying to make sense of what had been happening to me, replaying everything in my head, wondering how it had all gotten this far. Because I was afraid it would happen again, I decided to move to another city. Ever since I left, I haven't experienced anything like that anymore. Story 4. I was still in high school back then, counting down the days until graduation. Everyone around me was talking about college, entrance exams, and future plans. I posted a lot about it on social media, like study nights, coffee, random thoughts about being scared but excited for university. That's when he started appearing. At first, it was subtle. A new account watched my stories almost every day. No profile picture. Weird username. I told myself it was probably nothing. People watch stories all the time, right? Then one afternoon, he messaged me. He said he was a private tutor, claimed he taught subjects I was struggling with. He somehow knew I was planning to enter university that year. That alone made me pause, but he sounded polite. He even offered a really cheap price and said he just wanted to help motivated students. We talked a bit, mostly about school, exams, and my goals. He always replied fast, like he was waiting. Sometimes I felt uncomfortable, but I pushed it aside. I needed help, and my parents were busy, so I agreed to meet him at a library. The first time I saw him in person, he wore a mask, said he was sick. I didn't think much of it at the time, but something felt off because he didn't really teach. He asked more about me than my lessons, where I usually studied, who my friends were, and what time I went home. After that day, I told him I didn't need lessons anymore. That's when everything started to change. I began noticing him everywhere. Sometimes he stood across the street. Sometimes he sat far away at places I often went to, and he always wore a mask. Soon, my friends started bringing him up. They said someone had been asking about me. He claimed he was my tutor. He asked about my schedule, my classes, where I usually spent my time. Hearing that made my skin crawl. I realized he knew far too much. Then I learned the fact that he wasn't a teacher. He never was. He had been watching me long before I noticed him, learning my routines, using my own social media posts against me. The lessons were just an excuse, a way to get close without raising suspicion. After that, the stalking got worse. I started getting strange messages and anonymous notifications that felt like warnings. Sometimes they weren't clear threats, like he was reminding me that he was still there, that he knew where I was, what I was doing, and when I was alone. What scared me the most was how careful he was. Every account disappeared as quickly as it appeared. There were no real names, no photos, no traces that could be followed. He knew how to hide himself online. It felt like he understood technology far better than I did, and he used that to stay one step ahead. I tried limiting what I shared online. I changed my routines. I stayed around people whenever I could, but no matter what I did, it felt useless. He always seemed to know. And the worst part was knowing that even if I tried to prove it, there was almost nothing to show. No clear evidence and no digital footprint. I started feeling frustrated. I gathered every screenshot I had and showed them to my parents, hoping they would finally understand. But they didn't see what I saw. They said it was just random messages, probably someone joking around. To them, things like that were normal these days. But I couldn't ignore it. I tried explaining how often it happened, how specific they were, but the more I talked, the smaller it sounded to them. I felt stupid for even bringing it up. After that, I stopped talking about it. The fear kept growing quietly. I felt like my space was shrinking, like my world was getting smaller every day. Simple things started to feel difficult. Going out, sitting alone, and walking home. I always felt watched. Even crowded areas didn't feel safe anymore. I avoided certain routes. I stayed longer at school just to avoid being alone. I stopped posting online completely, but none of it brought real relief. What hurt the most was feeling alone in it. The people I trusted didn't see the danger because they thought it was a joke. I didn't feel free anymore. My movements felt limited. Even my own room didn't feel fully mine. I checked locks more than once. I looked out the window for no reason, and the worst part was that the fear took my sense of safety. It took my peace. After that, the stalking became more intense. He didn't stay far away anymore. I started feeling his presence closer than before. Sometimes I heard footsteps behind me when I was walking home. Sometimes a car followed me for a short distance, then disappeared. I became more careful with everything. I changed my routines. I avoided being alone. I stayed longer at school or with friends, just to feel safer. But even then, the fear is stronger. My parents started to notice something was wrong. I lost my appetite. I barely slept. I spent more time in my room with the door locked. I didn't talk much anymore. They asked if I was okay, but I always said I was fine, and the messages didn't stop. They came randomly. Sometimes they disappeared before I could screenshot them. I felt like he was slowly pushing me, testing how far he could go. I started feeling trapped. I didn't know what he wanted next, and that scared me more than anything. One day, everything almost went too far. I was walking home like usual in the late afternoon, trying to keep my mind calm even though I had that familiar feeling again. The feeling that someone was watching me. I told myself not to panic and just kept walking, pretending everything was normal. Then I noticed a car slowing down beside me. At first I tried to ignore it, but my body reacted before I could think clearly. When I looked over, I saw the mask. At that moment, my heart started beating so fast that it hurt. The window went down slightly, and before I fully understood what was happening, the door opened and he reached for me. I froze for a second, my mind completely blank. I pulled myself back and started screaming, using all the strength I had. People around began to notice, and someone shouted. That short moment was enough to break whatever he was trying to do. He let go and drove away quickly, disappearing down the street. I was left standing there, shaking and crying, unable to calm myself down. When I finally got home, my parents immediately saw that something was seriously wrong. I couldn't hide my fear anymore. My body was still trembling as I told them everything that had just happened. After that, they took it seriously. We reported everything, from the messages to the stalking and the incident that day. My phone and social media were checked more carefully, and when everything was put together, the pattern finally became clear. Even though he was good with technology and tried to erase his tracks, he wasn't as invisible as he believed. Not long after, he was caught. He was an adult who had been watching me for a long time. Starting from what I shared online, he was arrested and later sent to prison. After everything that happened, my parents started paying more attention to me. They stayed closer, checked on me more often, and made sure I was never truly alone. I also learned to make peace with myself. It wasn't easy, and the fear didn't disappear all at once, but I kept reminding myself that I had survived. At the very least, I was safe, and that was enough to help me keep going.